welcome to this webinar hosted today by Tarkett and moderated by myself, Roddy Clarke. It's great to have you all here. I'm a design writer, a speaker and consultant focusing on the positive social and environmental impacts of design and how brands and individuals can navigate their way to a greener future. Joining me today to discuss how to succeed in the race to net zero carbon buildings are three experts in their fields. That's Dr. Shamir Ghumra, the Head of Building Performance Services at BRE Group, Casper Østergaard Christensen, Architect and Head of Circular Building Practice at 3XN, and Myriam Tryjefaczka, the EMEA Sustainability Director for Tarkett. So, as we strive towards the Paris climate goals and the fight for a circular future, the race to net zero carbon buildings plays a huge role within it. In the UK alone, the built environment contributes to approximately 40% of all carbon emissions, with the construction sector contributing up to 11% of all global carbon emissions. While architects have acknowledged that they need to reduce embodied carbon by at least 40% from current business as baseline figures before offsetting, that's for projects in operation in 2030. This is a huge challenge which we are still quite a way off. And that's why today is an extremely important moment to raise awareness around the action we need to take and why taking accountability and responsibility as part of an industry shift towards a net zero carbon future is critical. Firstly, I would like to welcome to the stage, the virtual stage as we know it, Dr. Shamir Ghumra. Hi Shamir, it's wonderful to have you with us today to discuss the work that you do and to hear your perspective on the race towards a net zero carbon future. It would be great if you could tell us a little bit about your role at BRE Group and the BREEAM certification, which is a great guide for architects and designers to work towards.
Great, thanks very much indeed, and thank you, Roddy, for the introduction, and to Tarkett for hosting such an important conversation. And I hope we can have a good exchange of thoughts and ideas over the coming hour as well. So really just to introduce myself briefly as the slides make their way onto the stage. So my name is Shamir Ghumra. I'm Head of Building Performance Services at BRE Group, responsible for circa half of BRE Group activity that relates to sustainability in the built environment. And that incorporates, as Roddy rightly mentioned, the BREEAM suite of certification schemes as they appear around the world. So all of those aspects ultimately come to me from a global point of view, and BREEAM is used in over 90 countries throughout the world. And I'll touch a bit more about BREEAM and what it's been doing around this very important topic area for over 30 years now. So BRE as a group, many of you will know, is the real core engine room around science and research in the built environment, headquartered in the UK, but with many offices around the world. And our standards and mandates are absolutely used in over 100 countries throughout the world as well. So really pleased to be here. Hopefully the slides will arrive very shortly. And I can just give you a bit of a snapshot around what we've been doing and what I think are some of the key themes that I suspect will keep coming up as we start to unpack this really important topic area as well. So I guess when you start to really think about BRE, what we've done, that a lot of what we are about relates to the standards around the science and evidence base to allow us to have confidence and assurance in the outcomes that we collectively need to achieve. I'll touch a bit more about BREEAM and BRE standards more generally in a moment. But I think it's important that we understand what our role is within the built environment and in relation to not just sustainability, but a whole range of other aspects, which all do interconnect. And I think it's that interconnectivity of a whole range of sustainability issues that's given BREEAM the strength, the recognition, and the adoption that we see around the world, both for new construction and increasingly for the new existing building schemes that we operate as well. But a bit more about that later. I really want to touch upon two key themes that I think are vital for us to understand as we unpack this conversation, really. The aspect of time and the essence that clearly we are running out of it. And therefore, the closer we get to some of these milestone dates, 2030, 2040, 2050, or whatever it might be, actually that sense of urgency really starts to dawn. And nor do we want to panic in a sense that we want to create a lot of anxiety, but actually we need to channel that energy and that desire for change and transformation in the built environment in such a way that actually it gives us more confidence, belief that actually these goals are achievable and we have the right tools at our disposal today. But perhaps what we do need is scale. Wider adoption of some of the things I'm sure you'll hear about from some of the other speakers, fantastic examples of circularity, innovation around products and what those can achieve. So we're blessed with so much talent in our industry, but now is the time to really mobilize that and scale, to adopt, to change the way we procure things, to change the way we do things and think about these things in a different way, because fundamentally the road is getting shorter, unfortunately, and therefore our sense of action is ever going to become more and more acute. And I think as we talk about legislation, regulations, some of these things too will equally have to respond in an acute kind of way if we aren't going to be acting and changing fast enough. And the other key theme, just before I talk about BRE and BREEAM standards just generally, I think it's around data. So much of what we do and other organizations do as well relates to the credible science base behind standards, claims, certifications, and so forth. And particularly when it comes to this really important topic, clarification around scope, around definitions, of which there are a number, to bring clarity to the landscape, I think is critical. And having confidence in the data that sits beneath it is really, really important. Because if we're going to be making claims, we're going to be making decisions. Maybe investors are watching this, maybe product manufacturers, people in the supply chain watching this, thinking, well, how do we have confidence in the claims organizations are making, or the data at product level going to building level? Are we going to get the outcome that we expect? So we start to make interventions now in 2022 for projects that we might be designing now that might be built in 2025. And then we have some time to understand the operational impacts of those buildings. Are things performing as designed and as intended? It could be by 2030 before we realize what we've truly got. And we look across the asset base, the stock of existing buildings throughout the world. A highly significant proportion of what we've got today will still be here in 2050. So underpinning a lot of that is our ability to understand performance data, I think is absolutely essential. Just a couple of points here, and then I'll hand back to Roddy, and after we can start to open up the discussion. I think is very, very helpful. There are a number of definitions out there around what's a net zero building, how are we going to define it? And I think if people just want to take away a couple of things from today's session, be very clear and understand when you are talking about this topic area, what you mean by it, or what your customers mean by it, to make sure that we've got alignment, because I think that's absolutely essential. Are we talking about buildings beyond being on a net zero pathway with an expected date of which point they will get to net zero? Are we talking about absolute net zero today? So again, time, data keep coming back to the fore around how we are being able to demonstrate what we mean and what we can do with that information. So very briefly, I'll just touch upon BREEAM and what we've been doing for over 30 years. Quite a lot of our criteria have touch points with carbon, whether it's at construction stage, looking at products and materials, flooring. For those of you who've been around the BREEAM scheme for some time, remember the Green Guide to Specification, our pseudo LCA-based methodology that really harmonized the way that we look at products like carpets and floor finishes as well. And I'm pleased to say that was the sector that really did take some leadership and demonstrated that actually you can declare with confidence the environmental impact of some of these products, which I'm sure you'll hear a bit more about later on. So we've got, hopefully I've painted a bit of a landscape there for everybody to really show that actually there's a huge opportunity that lies ahead of us, lots of tools and systems that exist. But I do think absolutely it's important that we understand, raise our carbon literacy, I would suggest, and therefore be able to utilize data, look at the time horizons that we've got to work with, and really make some of these more strategic decisions today. I think is absolutely fundamental for us to make sure we achieve these global goals that we have no choice but to absolutely deliver on. So Roddy, back to you. Thank you very much.
That's really, really interesting, and it's really, really good to see the role that schemes such as Myriam can play in helping the shift towards a climate conscious future. And I think the specifics of the certification, how it takes into account each component that goes into a project. So it's really, really interesting. Just maybe if you could just give us a quick insight into kind of what you think. You speak about time and the urgency of time. What you think, in your view, are the biggest obstacles in reaching these targets?
Yeah, and I think it's a challenge, isn't it? Where we've got some great examples of leadership with organisations, some which you'll hear about today, making massive strides around setting ambitious goals, not waiting for 2050. And I think the hesitancy in trying to push things out further and further does create a lag, does create apathy in some cases where actually, well, we've got time. Maybe 28 years for some is, a long time, but actually in the time that remains ahead of us to make significant change, we need organisations to be more ambitious, to bring these dates forward, to talk about 2030, to talk about 2040, particularly, because by the time we get to these milestone points and we evaluate what we've done and looking at that gap to go, if our realization is that the gap still remains to be too big, our opportunities for intervention will get incredibly small, and that's the challenge. So I would say that take some leadership and set more ambitious goals. Many organizations are doing this now. The private sector, I think, is doing some great work. Public sector bodies are doing some good work as well. Legislation is starting to ramp up around the world, and it has got to be a global unified effort. I think it's where, particularly where you've got global companies, global investors setting a consistent framework of standards and goals around the world, I think is incredibly helpful as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. It's been really helpful. As you say, we're in this race together as a global community, as a global society, and I think that should really, spur us on to take action. So thank you very much for your initial thoughts and views. We will be seeing you back on stage in a short while. And for now, I'm going to call on to stage the next speaker, Casper. It's great to have you with us here. There you are. Thank you so much for joining us today, Casper. Obviously, as an architect, you've explored and implemented circular building practices yourself. You're helping to close the loop on different projects that you've worked on. Can you tell us more about your role, and also maybe expand on if you're seeing an increase in demand for this approach to architecture as a whole?
Yeah, definitely. And hi, everybody. My name is Casper, and I'm happy to be here today to share my thoughts and experiences in the circular building practice. So just to explain my role and what I do a bit, and also to expand on your question on if we are seeing more demand in this. So in my career, I think in the beginning, looking like 10 years back, sustainability was a lot about looking at energy, but now we are seeing this shift towards looking at the materials that we use for our buildings. And when we started working with the circular building mindset, it was about a theory and ideas about how to actually do this. And now we are also seeing the shift that now we're actually going to get a lot of these ideas into practice, which is also what sort of reflects my title, Head of Circular Building Practice. It is that now we're taking our ideas from theory and ideas into an actual building practice. And that's sort of what I'm heading here. It's creating the tools and the systems to go from theory to practice.
And I think one of the specific projects that you've worked on, which would be great to find out more about, is the collective housing project. Because I know circularity was a key component in that, and it's a really interesting project where obviously it's a social housing project, and it's bridging the gap between affordability and sustainability, which is a huge challenge we all face.
Yeah, definitely, and I think it's a really good sign of that. It's not more expensive to build circular. Just need to have the right mindset and choose the right solutions. Maybe we can bring up the slides, then I can just go through a bit of the project. So the project is called Circle House, sorry, the subtitle here is in Danish, but it says it's Denmark's first circular social housing unit. And basically we had like one overachieving goal in the project, and it is that we want to have 90% of all the materials that we put into the building. We want to be able to reuse them at a high value at a later point. And when we say high value, we mean like at a resource level and also like monetary level. Today, when in Denmark, we say we are really good at recycling material, and actually we are recycling 87% of all building waste. But that is when we look at recycling and not at the value. For example, if you are to recycle concrete, it's often as gravel on our roads. And a new concrete element has a value of several hundred euros. And that's day one. But when we are to recycle it as gravel, it has a value of a few euros. So that's like a huge gap in value, and it's that value gap that we are trying to gap in Circular House. And basically that means that we are designing the whole building system a lot on the principles for design for disassembly. So we can take apart the buildings and reuse the materials as they are. And yes, and the project that we have designed is it's a social housing project, and it's 60 housing units, and it's split over 4 different typologies to show that some variety and flexibility in the building system. So it's not just like one type of housing, but it's multiple. It's built in concrete, which in itself is not very close to zero carbon, but we can't avoid using it, so we sort of wanted to push that agenda as well. And here's a very simple floor plan of one of the tower blocks you saw. And the dark gray you see here is the concrete elements, and everything in light gray is made from a lighter material, for example, wood. So it's much more flexible and it's much more changeable over the years. So basically here, and everything is then assembled using reversible joints, so it can be taken apart and moved around as one see fits. And as you can see, if you were to remove all the light gray, you get a very flexible floor plan, but also a very flexible facade that you can change over the years to adapt to changing needs. And that was basically one of the key points from our client here. Right now, they're spending a lot of resources on adapting apartments from the 60s and 70s made in concrete, and adapting them to the current needs, and people need larger apartments now than they did back then. So they see a huge value in that. And if we can avoid spending on the resources and have the building waste by having more flexible apartments, that also lowers the carbon footprint of the total life cycle of the building. We'll just flip through here. Here's the same footprint, but another set of apartments in the block. You can kind of see the building system here, that it is this repetition of these concrete walls. And here we move to the row houses. See, it's the same building system. You have a set of concrete walls that are then repeated only once. And the last typology here is where you have like 2 wide apartments next to each other, and then like a row house on top. But again, you can see it's the same building system, but just a variety of that. And that's also the thinking here, that if we are to reuse the building materials as they are in the future, it needs to be they need to be alike, and they don't need to be like with a lot of specific openings and windows and all that. So it's very simple elements that you can use in multiple ways. And here, just to show how much you can do in terms of flexibility by only affecting the lighter elements, we have it's the same fixed concrete structure, but we're just using the lighter elements, the walls and surface materials in different ways to create different layouts in the apartments. And before actually building the whole project, we have built this small demonstrator just outside the client's office. You can see it out the window here. And basically, it's just one of the housing units, or like one part of the building system, to sort of give it an impression of how it would look. But then on top of that, we also just like pumped it with a lot of different circular building materials to show off to the industry, to say, hey, it's actually possible to go out there right now and get some materials that you can use to have a circular building project. And yeah, that's also from the outside. We just clad it in a lot of different circular materials. On the very colored one here, it's made from recycled consumer plastics that's made into facade. And on the back side, we have cork. And here's a design for this is simply a shingle facade. Yeah, so that's the Circle House project, just explained very quickly. And again, it's social housing, so it's a very low price. And right now, it's under construction, the larger project. So that's like one of our, let's say, lighthouse projects that's really like paved the way for a lot of our the work we're doing at the moment, which is some larger projects. But just getting something built and show the industry that this is possible is a really good step, and also something to push the agenda. So I can really encourage people to just get something built, as an example.
Thank you, Casper. Yeah, that's really interesting, and it gives us such a great insight into, you know, the specific approach that you took for this project and how it is possible to, you know, bridge that gap. And as you said earlier, you know, meaning if for something for it to embark on a circular building project, it doesn't always have to be a cost implication. It can be about, you know, innovating around that. And obviously in all of your projects, how do you monitor the carbon footprint of each project, of each product individually?
Often, yeah, we of course use specific programs like One Click LCA, or there's also like a specific Danish program to monitor carbon footprint. And sometimes there's just like some generic data. But what we really like is when we get like EPDs, for example, that where the manufacturer has been in and yeah, reviewing their own product and can give us some specific numbers on how this product affects it. And it is something that we're looking more and more into. And of course, the more specific data we can get, the more right our calculations can be in the end, and the more we can predict the final outcome instead of just having generic data. So that's like really one thing I would like to champion. That is that all the manufacturers, yeah, even though it can be expensive, but get the EPDs and all the documentation done, because it really helps in our work to push this agenda.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think that leads us on actually perfect timing to our next speaker, where we'll talk about, you know, I think data is key, and that's what, you know, both you and Shamir have both highlighted, that we need the data. We need the data to back these, you know, back the products up. So thank you so much for your time, Casper. Again, we'll see you shortly in a very short while.
Yeah.
And I'd just like to welcome to the stage Myriam. It'd be great to hear. I think it's a really good segue into, you know, what you're going to talk about in terms of specifics and the work that you've done at Tarkett. So if you could please tell us about your role at Tarkett and the strategies that you've implemented to aid the transition to net zero carbon buildings.
Good morning, Roddy. Thank you. So I am Sustainability and Public Affairs Director at Tarkett for Europe and the Middle East area. Tarkett offers a wide range of flooring products, and we'll see some example in the context of this discussion later. So at Tarkett, we are committed to accelerating the transition towards a circular economy and a low carbon society. We want, in doing so, support as well our customers to reach their own objective regarding their own transition. So we have been a pioneer in implementing circular economy. We started around 2010, and we chose the cradle-to-cradle framework that we consider to be a systematic approach for eco-designing product solution and developing as well robust supply chains, integrating a lot of collaborations with our suppliers and with customers. And we are firmly convinced that today, to address the carbon emission reduction and the goals for carbon neutrality, we need to enhance the circular economy, because there is a kind of multiplying factor in the positive impact we can get, considering the reduction of use of virgin resources. So we focused many years ago already on the recyclability of our products. And we as well completed it with services we provide to our customers in order to recollect the materials at the end of use. So this is what we do and what we propose to our customers. Beyond that, we have objective by 2030 to reduce our carbon emission by 30% on the whole value chain, which include the benefits of recycling raw materials and new recycled materials. And we want as well to integrate those 30% recycled content in our products. So it's reducing globally the carbon footprint and integrating more recycled content in our materials. So concretely in 2021, as we are already doing that, and you will understand how much powerful is circular economy regarding carbon emission reduction. So we collected and we recycled 147,000 tons of recycled materials in our operation. We avoided, thanks to that, 280,000 tons of CO2 emissions. And just to realize that those 280,000 tons of CO2 emissions is more than all the emissions of our factories. So it is significant for Tarkett. It is significant as a positive impact for the global society and reducing the impact of a company that runs 32 factories and counts 12,000 employees.
Amazing. And I think one of the recent projects that you've launched is the carbon calculator, which I'm really excited to share with the audience. And I think this is going to be revolutionary. It's kind of the first of its kind, where customers can actually measure the impact of products very easily. Can you explain more about this tool and how it's going to work?
Yes, so we prepared a few slides about this new project and what we have put online indeed, so it is accessible for everyone on our website. So the carbon calculator is a very new tool. It's quite unique in our industry because we are integrating the end of use phase of the product and what happens at the end of life of the product. So it's very simple to use, and we have prepared here an example for an IQ Eminent. IQ Eminent is a vinyl floor covering which can be used in a very demanding environment such as hospitals or schools. So let's take an example with the next slide. So that's how you will see the interface of the product of the module for calculating a carbon footprint with on your computer. So it's very simple. You just have to enter the lifetime expected for the building. Let's say a building that should last in the calculation for 60 years. And then you enter the surface of the project. 20,000 square meters is typical of an hospital, for example. Then the calculation is done by the module, and you have, as it is usually required by the calculators for building carbon footprint, the result that is that our IQ imminent will emit 21.01 kilogram of CO2 per square meters over 60 years. What is interesting and what changes from what we are used to is that very often everyone focuses on the production and the installation phase, which is the material we use, the production, delivery, and installation. But here we are integrating the end of use, and that's where you see that in a circular society, we will have to completely integrate from the onset the project we have for the product at the end of life, meaning that we want to avoid sending products when renovating buildings or the construction of building. And we saw with Casper that they can be reused somewhere else, but there needs to be some adjustment and probably some changes in the finishes before doing that. But if we consider from the beginning that the material will be recycled, then we reduce considerably the carbon footprint of the material. And that's what we want to show our customers, because we believe that if we want to onboard our customers in the journey towards circularity, we need to give them concrete figures, concrete examples. So here they understand that the carbon footprint is 21 kilogram of CO2 per square meter over 60 years. Of course, what does it really represent? And what we have done is that we calculate the equivalent of those tons of CO2 avoided in something that is more concrete. So we choose numbers of flight, equivalent of trees, keeping carbon, or and that's should help our customers having some references on what it really brings a positive impact when choosing the carbon calculator.
Amazing. And again, this is what I mentioned earlier about taking accountability, and you really are taking accountability and making it easy for customers to, invest in products which, where the data is there. And I think also if you could you mentioned it briefly earlier about the Restart program.
Yes, exactly.
That would be really interesting to hear about that as well, and how you've salvaged tiles from construction sites around the globe.
Yes. So I will not describe the full detail, but let's go immediately into a true story and what we can do today, what we can deliver to our customers. So a few years ago, we developed the possibility to recycle post-use homogeneous flooring. This happens in our factory in Sweden, and it was natural to collaborate with a Swedish company at that time that is as well really motivated with the circular economy. And we did it with IKEA. So IKEA has been using Tarkett floors for many years in their stores, and we had the first experience with IKEA in Kungens Kurva in Sweden. So there we were able to recapture 10,000 square meters of used floor covering. They were brought back in our factory, where they were cleaned from the backing, the glue residues, regrind in raw materials, and integrated in new production of flooring. So this was a closed loop system. We did it as well in another IKEA store in Belgium, again recapturing materials, and we were able to calculate the impact on the carbon emissions. So we recaptured close to 15,000 square meters in total, and we were able to avoid the emissions of 150 tons of CO2 with this operation and this collaboration. So to make the circular economy happen, we need collaboration. So we need to onboard people on the program. We need to create real, agreement, signing an agreement. It's a commitment of both parties, Tarkett and our customers or installers, to bring back material so that the collection, the recycling, the restart program is a living example of what we can achieve in circular economy. And just to mention that restart in Europe is developed in 16 countries today, and it is in constant evolution and development.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Myriam. That's so helpful and really inspiring to see the change that's already taking place. It's been really inspiring hearing you all talk about, independent projects, individual changes that we can make. But what are your thoughts on, the global marketplace as a whole? Is the infrastructure in place to achieve the goals that we've been talking about on a larger scale? Shamir, maybe if we come to you first on that.
Great, and I think I'd just like to reflect on my co-panelists first of all. It's great to see some wonderful examples of what's possible and has been happening for some time. And I think, as Myriam rightly pointed out, Tarkett and others, it didn't happen last week. It's been going on for some time, and I think sometimes it's very easy to lose sight of that actually lots of organizations have already been deploying programs like this, have got experience, got track record, have got an evidence base to demonstrate things that can work. So, I think it's important for people to take that away from the webinar today, that actually there's a lot that's already there, and many organizations are doing some great work. And I think that example there, particularly around being able to identify the life cycle study period, in that example there, we saw 60 years. It's innovation like that that helps people understand, well, okay, how often do I need to replace my tiles? How's the product designed so that can I actually take it back up without it shredding to bits or the glue never comes off? So it is truly a holistic approach, which I think is fundamental to our ability to deliver, I think, as well. To go back to your point there, Roddy, I think it's totally doable. We don't have a choice. And I think that's the reality that we have to kind of keep coming back to, that, well, what's the alternative? Well, the alternative is incredibly not very pleasant at all as a scenario for the world. So the choice isn't there. We have to act. And therefore, when people have less choice, you will, let's say, necessity is the mother of invention. So we will find a way, or we will make a way, but it is absolutely inevitable that we will have to accelerate this change. There are incredible supply chain, talk about the take-back schemes in the carpet flooring sector. There are immense programs now in place. So if people are wondering where is their local, supplier or depot, where can I get this recycled? People are working on a project, maybe they haven't got 10,000 square meters. Okay, we get that. Not everyone's replacing 10,000 square meters every other Thursday, but it's where we can find nodes of activity, and many manufacturers have systems whereby actually if you reach out to them, then they will identify, actually there's a facility here, it's not that far from you, it's going to be helpful for you to be able to kind of contribute to, even if it's in a small scale, because I think that's the other key part of this. The whole system has got to be accessible to all parts of the supply chain, big projects and small projects, social housing, as we just saw, private developments, commercial real estate. Every aspect of the built environment has to be able to take part if we are collectively going to achieve these goals.
100%, and yeah, as you say, it's again it's giving us hope that the fact that there is change that's already taken place and change can continue to happen. And I think, Myriam, coming back to you, it's about individual action and what we do individually that contributes to this global change. What can you say to kind of encourage that, that participation from an individual level, and how we can contribute to the race?
Yes, very often people focus on the big chunk of the climate, of the carbon emission in the buildings and the concrete, the metal, the glass, and so on. And people tend to overlook interiors and finishes. Indeed, we believe that every contribution is important to tackle climate change, and that's why, as well, even if flooring represents 3 to 7% of the carbon, of the embodied carbon in the building, it is important that we provide solutions. And these solutions, because you will not touch the structure of a building very often, but you will have to renovate the building for repurposing it, for adapting it to the next usage. And it is important that the interiors, which will probably be replaced and refurbished more often than the building as a whole, have as well the same takes the same responsibility on the global impact of the building.
Just to add a bit to your point here, Myriam, I think the interiors is a really good place to start because, as you say, it has a shorter lifespan than our buildings in general. So, because I think that's one of the challenges with the building industry, like the times are so long before something is built and taken down, as I just talked about. That's maybe 50, 70 years. But I mean, with the interiors, we can actually go out and do now because we are changing them more or less all the time, or at least like every 5 or 10 years. So that's something we can do now, and we should do that just to get ahead.
Yeah, and really the message is that think about the end of life at the onset of the project, because if you do not do that now, when you are thinking about how to make this project efficient for its usage, and you did not integrate, you might end up in a dead end. Because it will not be possible to disassemble, it will not be possible to recycle, and that will impair at the end the impact you wanted to have at the beginning. So even the best intention cannot succeed just because we overlook the end of life of the product. So that's why we really wanted to move forward and to highlight to our customers and our partners the benefit of recycling, because that when we launch a project, when we specify some solution, when the architects or the engineering companies specify some types of product that they need to integrate, that you need to sign a restart agreement from the start, because you know that in 10, 15 years from now, as said Casper, you will have to collect back and to recycle this product. Otherwise, the calculation will be wrong, and we cannot afford to mislead the people in projects that should deliver carbon efficiency and the net zero if we do not bring this project till the end with real net zero ambition.
100%. Yeah, I mean, I think it's great, and I think thinking about that end of life, removing that concept of end of life, and thinking about closing that loop and its life is just ongoing of each product.
Roddy, can I come in? I think it's really important, the point that we just touched upon here about the refurbishment and fit out opportunity, because so much of the built environment that will be here in 2050 is already built. Yeah. It is here today. So we have to think about the spectrum of assets that we've got and the interventions we can make, some small, some big, and therefore it's the collective built environment that needs to get to these end goals. And if we can make those interventions sooner, great. Think about the options that we've got at our disposal now, bad pun, and actually how do we recycle, rethink, and re-engineer some of these systems. And I think it's such a big growth market opportunity, because let's not forget, actually, we've just been through, and not that we're quite out of it yet, but the last 2 years, we've seen fundamental change in the way that we use and understand and occupy, work at home, and everything else that we're doing right now. So our usage of offices or hospitals and schools and everything else has been subjected to significant change. Some organizations have used this opportunity to repurpose buildings. Investors looking at now, how do some of these buildings become big retail organizations, big offices in London? Maybe they're turning into housing. So these dynamics are here today, they're happening right now as we speak. And I think it's an incredible opportunity that a marketplace can realize. And I think there's going to be huge innovation and new organizations rising up to respond to these opportunities.
And if I may, I think it's really what Casper showed us in the project, that is let's grasp the possibilities of modularity of buildings and possibilities to give them another life without breaking it into all the many parts.
And basically that also ties into that we shouldn't think about end of life, but next life.
Yes.
generally that term should just
Yeah, no, 100%. I think it is always, continually closing that loop. And when even, from designers who might be on the call, designers designing products, are we designing with, that vision in mind, that there is no end of life, and it can constantly be reused, repurposed, and pull back into the circle. And I guess, Casper, just touching on that and coming to you, are there any materials that you would recommend that, we can look out for? What have you used for your project specifically?
Well, in terms of talking about net zero carbon buildings, we should focus more on biogenic materials like timber and all that, sort of get a lower carbon footprint. But again, as we just talked about, and I think you also talked about it, Myriam, that we shouldn't think it as end of life, but we shouldn't burn it afterward for energy, but have a plan with it so we can reuse it again. So that's that. But I'm also, but that's just in terms of talking about zero carbon. I'm also not pro or con any materials. I think it's more like you need to think about them in a large ecosystem. So I don't think we should ban or just leave concrete. I think we should just use it the right way because we are going to use a lot of materials. So it's about using the right materials at the right place at the right time and in the right way. But yeah, we do need to focus on how to get our carbon down, and that is using more biogenic materials, upcycled materials, and reused materials, and then put them together in a good way.
Amazing. I think we're just coming into sort of our last 10 minutes, so I'd like to touch on a couple of questions that have come in from the audience. I think there's been a lot of inspiring. Mika Stuan has asked, when recycling old vinyl floor coverings from IKEA, how did you deal with the additives, the plasticizers and heavy metals that were commonly used in vinyl flooring several decades ago?
I like this question because that's where you see that you need to have long-term vision, long-term ambitions. As I mentioned, we started more than 10 years ago implementing the cradle-to-cradle philosophy and principle to all our products. Linoleum is certified cradle-to-cradle gold, for instance. It is a biosourced material, but we do it as well for vinyl. So for 10 years ago, we started to review completely the materials we use to make our vinyls. And we had a very proactive substitution of plasticizers. And we ensured that our production, and we shifted all our production to non-phthalate plasticizers, for instance, for the vinyl. It means that today we have developed the technology, we have the materials that are coming to the end of life, and we can recapture them. So you see that the ambition 10 years ago was to produce materials that were able to be recycled now, 10 years later. So that's what we do for all our products now. And what we can recapture now is proof safe. I don't know if it is good in English, but it is exactly the philosophy of circular economy. We need safe materials for fueling our circular economy.
Brilliant. And I could just whilst we're on this topic, another couple of questions that have come in from Sue Shaw. Are you prepared to recycle other flooring manufacturers' products? And also, have any adhesives been developed that don't need to be removed prior to recycling?
Yes, so for instance, for the carpet tiles, we collect and recycle not only Tarkett carpet tiles, but as well carpets from competitors. They provided that the nylon and the fiber is compatible for the recycling program. So we need to check anyway. Not everything can be recycled, that's true. But what we do, we are open to recycle as much as possible, provided that it is compatible with our standards.
Brilliant, thank you. Shamir, there's a comment that's come in which I think is quite an interesting perspective, and I think it's from Christopher Radcliffe. It says we must approach our projects with a holistic mindset. All material is from the earth and has been manipulated to suit our needs and wants. Nothing should be exploited without considering the global consequences, because the materiality of our earth is not renewable, only recyclable. we construct, we need to know how to deconstruct. What are your thoughts on that and that viewpoint?
It's a really good question. Thank you for posing it. And it is absolutely essential that we always take a holistic view around these assessment methodologies or systems and standards, whatever they're trying to achieve. Because if we don't take into account all the externalities, we don't take into account the whole life perspective, or indeed subsequent life, as we've just been discussing, then you run into the risk of unintended consequences that actually, by looking at a single point in time or a single isolated metric, you can have unintended consequences. And often I draw out the example that, London had an air quality issue. Cars were seen as being high polluting and contributing to that poor air quality outside. The policy was passed quite a few years ago around just the CO2 level, but actually just focusing on purely that metric in that specific context and isolation meant some people went out and bought small diesel powered cars, and that actually made the air quality context far worse, actually, because it was small diesel powered cars sitting in a lot of traffic. So it's really important that we take a holistic approach. BREEAM has always taken a holistic approach, which is why you end up with criteria that look at the trade-offs within the building and actually taking the assessment at the building level over its life cycle, if you go from new construction to in use and so forth, that actually start to build up a truer picture of the impacts you're going to be creating. And yes, we absolutely take into account transportation, waste, pollution, and materials. It's a big component of BREEAM as well. But we don't fixate on any one specific criteria within that holistic approach, because as you rightly point out, we've got to take into account all these things and how they come together, and recognizing actually there may be scenarios where, as Casper was just alluding to, it's got to be the right type of material for the right type of outcome as well.
Amazing, yeah, thank you. And Casper, Nicholas Banquart has asked, from your experience, how strong is the willingness of investors and building owners and end users to promote net zero buildings? And obviously, a lot of it is about education, but how have you found that? Have you noticed anything at all?
We definitely see an increase in the carbon awareness, and I think especially within the last couple of years. And I think the investors do it for different reasons. Like, some see it as a marketing tool because they have tenants that only want to live in a sustainable building or lease it. Then some are doing it because they feel like they have responsibility to do it because they are building so much. But then also, as there is starting to be legislations around this, like in London, for example, but also in Denmark now, there's starting to be some targets that you need to hit with your buildings. And if it's not targets yet, they know that's going to come within a few years, and they want to stay like ahead of the curve and be prepared for what's coming. So within the last couple of years, there's been a different rise in the carbon awareness, and it's only going to be more. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, brilliant. And I think just before we wrap up this conversation, I think it would be great to hear from all of you just, any final words on any takeaways, how we can succeed in this race to, towards net zero carbon buildings. You've all spoken a lot about data and time and all of these factors that are playing into this race. But if we could just go around and maybe Myriam, start with you, just some final words to kind of spur us on towards, participating in this race.
What we learned from our experience in driving our own programs towards circularity is that it's critical to integrate the product end of life from the onset, whether for eco-designing it or for a wider perspective of a construction project. Technology is important, how to recycle materials, and we experience from that products that have not been developed to be recycled will be very, very hard to recycle in a way because it doesn't fit. So again, think from the beginning about the recyclability and the technology that goes with it, along with it, to make the circularity and the story happen at the end. The service, offering a service, it is turnkey solution that provides peace of mind to our customers because when you choose the product for the project, you choose as well the end of life scenario. And that is where you start building more collaboration, building more trust along the value chain, and that changes as well the perspective on the business.
Brilliant, thank you. And Casper, coming to you, any final words?
Yeah, I just want to highlight all the good things that also come and all the value that you gain from building a sustainable building. Because just thinking about the carbon, that's a necessity. But like when you're building design, but it's simply you get a more flexible building. When you're looking into an EPD and documenting what's in your material, manufacturers, and I know Tarkett has done that as well, are starting to look into what type of emissions do we have and what type of chemicals in there. So you get a cleaner material, but also a cleaner environment for people that's living there. So I mean, there's all these run-off effects you get that is much more valuable and much more giving than just thinking about carbon. That in itself is just a number, which is important in terms of the climate. But you get so much more than just a number, and I think that's really important to keep in mind because it gives us much better buildings.
Brilliant, yeah, thank you. And Shamir, it'd be great to hear your final thoughts as well.
Wonderful, thank you. And obviously I'd like to thank my panelists and thank you, and obviously everybody taking part and listening and asking questions online, because that's obviously makes it all worthwhile. And I hope those who are listening can reflect on certain things that they've heard today. Maybe they can take away. And I think that's a key part of any of these webinars that people go on nowadays, that there's a lot of these things going on. And I think what we've tried to do here is really bring it to life and have a conversation, and in a way that hopefully people can resonate with some of the things that we've said, I think. And if you can come away and think about, how do I act now, today, do something, a decision, influencing decision you may be making in your own work life, or a question perhaps you now need to ask in a way that perhaps you haven't asked, and maybe you're trying to find some data actually, and maybe there's probably more of this data available than perhaps you first thought, or maybe the manufacturer has actually got something that perhaps it's a bit hidden, but actually there's some really high quality, credible third-party data that's been verified through an EPD. Perhaps could be a very useful place to start. So I would say look a bit more around some incredible sources of data that they are out there. There are more and more EPD coming to the market every day. There's more to come, I'm sure, but there is stuff out there. So utilize what we've got, take part, I would say, be involved in these discussions and help influence the supply chain, whatever actor you are in that supply chain, whatever component place you have within it, take part. You know, you've got a voice and make it heard. I think it's incredibly powerful. And, you know, absolutely, as I said at the beginning of this session, really, the sense of urgency, not panic, but the sense of urgency to act now is really here today. So I think it's wonderful to have had the opportunity to share our thoughts with you all today. So thanks, Roddy.
Thank you, Shamir. Brilliant note to end on there. And thank you to everyone for joining this conversation. In joining this, you know, you're helping to raise awareness around this topic. And we are in critical times, but I think we can leave optimistic. Change has happened. Change will continue to happen. And I think we've seen that in everyone that's spoken today. And thank you for the three panelists for your insight and your encouragement. And I think we can go forward, you know, spurred on to act now, I think was your closing remark there, Shamir, and I think that's really good. You know, we've learned that data is key. And I think challenging people that you're working with, asking for data, and, you know, pointing other brands towards, you know, things like the carbon calculator and other tools that brands are using can really help brands to learn and designers to learn and corporations to learn on how to change and adapt. So thank you all. The race is definitely very much on, and we're still very much a part of it. And we thank you so much to Tarkett for hosting, and thank you everyone for joining, and we look forward to seeing you all soon.